The peeps in the Discord recommended I check out this video along with the video that's currently on screen. Ogres are the best Warhammer race to live as. Now, I mean, humanity in 40k, it's kind of, yeah, that's to be expected that it really sucks. Unless we're not talking about 40k and we're talking about fantasy. But even in fantasy, it's really bad. So, as always, make sure to go support Pancreas. Link to the OG video at the very top of the description, as always. And let's see what points Pancreas brings up in this video.
Well, this video did well. Time to ride its coattails. Selling my values for money. Whoop whoop. Nah, for real though. Have you ever thought about how much it sucks to be a human in one of the Warhammer settings? Seriously, being isekai'd into one of the Warhammer human empires, be it 40k or fantasy or Age of Sigmar, would be absolutely miserable. I'm talking.
Okay, so then maybe it's just Warhammer as a whole. But Warhammer 40k, no matter which race you get spawned as, it's probably going to be super bad. That is one isekai that you don't want to have.
Constant pain and despair for 99.999999% of people. That's 8 nines. That's as many nines as my first gamer tag had. I was like,
damn.
10, leave me alone. Honestly though, sometimes people will say that humanity in these settings, particularly 40k, doesn't really have it that bad, and that for the average person, things are looking pretty alright. And I have to—
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure that everybody just kind of accepted the way that their life is, and they have to endure it, rather than flourish and happily survive it. Well, happily live. Everybody's just trying to survive overall.
To say, I really disagree for a number of reasons. It sucks to be a human being there. It sucks hard. Let me tell you why. First off, fantasy. I mean, it's pretty simple here. In Bretonnia, for starters, because I love shitting on Bretonnia, you're a medieval serf as a default state of being. You wake up, you farm, you repair roads in your thatched hut with one room in it. 2, if you're an extremely wealthy peasant. You share this hut with your farm animals because there's no affording a barn for them. Again, you're a medieval serf and everything is owned by the lord of the land. You pay the vast majority of the food you grow and any things you make to said lord in exchange for security and land, because medieval life was a nationwide protection racket in fancy armor. And the lords treat you like absolute dog shit. You should be honored if one of them walks all over you like a rug, because that means the lord paid attention to you long enough to do so. If you're really lucky, you might be cannon fodder in one of their wars. And if you're lucky enough to be a Bretonian noble, it isn't much better because you're still at a medieval standard of living. Things like modern medicine and refrigeration or germ theory are at best crazy talk, and at worst going to get someone killed for being a chaos cultist. Sure, you get to feast a lot as a noble, but that's still barely anything. Do you know how much flavor is in that bag of chips you're eating? A single Dorito chip would—
I mean, like, all the little things, they might have that as the noble and being rich, but, like, there's still the looming darkness all around you that at any moment everybody could just get overrun by, like, the Skaven or the vampires or chaos itself. Like, it's not a good place to be.
Would kill someone from medieval times, they'd go into shock. Why do you think things like salt and pepper were so goddamn valuable back then? Food was crap. I swear it's not just the ogre in me talking, the stuff was bland as hell. If you're a human in Bretonnia, you're gonna be in for a shit time if you aren't lucky enough to drink the Lady of the Lake's gamer girl bathwater. And even then, you still have to deal with all the trash living conditions around you. You just get magically healed and live a little longer. If I shot you in the heart but it magically healed, you'd still be in pain even if you don't die from it. And the Empire of Man isn't much better. The common folk aren't treated quite as poorly, but that's offset by the fact that the Industrial Revolution and its consequences are right around the corner for them. The good old massive wealth inequality, horrible factory conditions, and other things like horrid and squalid living conditions that made Karl Marx write that little book of his. So at best, the Empire of Man citizens can look forward to a communist revolution in their future, even disregarding that whole end times business. Same deal for Imperial nobles as Bretonian nobles, only they don't even get the Lady of the Lake's piss jar for magical health and life extension. Did you know that in the Gotrek and Felix novels, Felix is treated by a doctor and is shocked when the doctor doesn't use leeches in the Four Humors school of medicine? That's what these people have to look forward to. I'd almost welcome the Black Death compared to that. And if you live in either of those two countries, you sure as hell are gonna have to deal with the plague every now and then. Nippon sure exists, and that's all I can really say for it. Same for Araby, so who the fuck knows what's going on there? I'm assuming these countries have the same living situations as above, but I guess I can't say for certain. Telea is right next.
I mean, they exist, but, like, you don't really know too much about them. Overall, though, like, this kind of goes against the points that Pancreas made in the Ogre video, because the reason why Pancreas thinks the Ogres are the best race to live as is because they're pretty oblivious to most of everything. Whereas as a human, you know the dire situation that you're in. And honestly, just that fact of knowing, it's gonna really bring down the quality of life, let's say, you're not going to be happy. I find it very difficult to be happy or to live like a full and fulfilling life. Although, then again, maybe living as a human in the Warhammer fantasy universe is kind of okay because that's just expected and they don't really know anything better than that. But like if we knowing all the conveniences of the modern age were to be isekai'd into such a world, then yeah, of course, it would really, really suck and we'd have to adapt and probably miss home very, very much.
Next to Skavenblight, so add all the fun of being a Renaissance-era peasant combined with the fact you live next to these things. Doesn't he look like a friendly neighbor? The border princes are the same as Telea,
really.
only instead of Skaven, it's orcs. And Cathay lives by the ogres, who sometimes like to come out of the mountains and devour a town or 12 for lunch. Beyond that, I'm willing to bet that it's mostly the same as the Empire and or Bretonnia, only with the added benefit that they're based on Chinese history. So I can only imagine at least one city in Cathay has had its occupants eaten by the military after rations ran out during a siege. God, I love Chinese history. Oh, and of course humanity has to deal with the occasional raid by
Well, that I didn't know, but I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, Pancreas is actually a historian or teaches history. I do find Chinese history to be quite interesting, though, when it's in the form of like some sort of novel. A manga that I used to read a while back was called Kingdom, and it was kind of based off of that, and I really enjoyed it quite a bit. I haven't seen the anime for it, though. I don't think it was that great. And there was like a point in the manga where it kind of like went down a path that I wasn't really okay with. But, you know, overall, I did enjoy my time reading it. So yeah, actually, wait, no. There is a Total War game based in the Chinese kind of history. I should try that someday. But first, I should definitely try out Shogun too.
Beastmen, or Vikings, or rat people with machine guns, or elves looking to add to the pile of rape slaves in their dungeon, or elves who are theoretically on their side, but the humans had the gall to ask why an army of elves suddenly showed up in their border, so of course the elves had to defend themselves from this wanton act of aggression, or attacks from their dwarven allies because 1,000 years ago one particular human's ancestor accidentally shorted a dwarf 2 silver pieces in a trade deal, so obviously the whole county had to go, or mushrooms. And for this video, unlike the ogres, I'll compare them to the other fantasy races, so you can really appreciate how suck human lives are. First off, they're close neighbors, the dwarfs. I'm not screwing with you, dwarfs in fantasy have a damn near perfect immune system. It's brought up in, once more, Gotrek and Felix. The dwarfs were doing the thing where they complain about everything, including humans being weak compared to them. Felix got some good comebacks in though, so that was neat. But anyway, yeah, as a dwarf, you're not getting sick, so for living conditions, that's pretty fucking insane. Hygiene just isn't an issue. But beyond that, their lives are pretty comfy, or at least comfy in the sense that they care about. Dwarf holds are pretty damn nice. Sure, they deal with invading orcs and ratmen, but that's everyone. If everything's going well, they're damn near impregnable in a siege. And the dwarfs, while also in the stage of the Industrial Revolution, are so obsessed with things working right and following OSHA protocols that their factories, for one, aren't run by child labor, and two, they don't run the risk of cutting off some poor bastard's fingers because the owners couldn't be bothered to turn a machine.
From my understanding of the dwarves, before the time of woes happened, they were just having the good life. Like, everybody was basically extremely rich. Their holds were like the most beautiful thing you could ever see. Everybody kind of just wanted to trade with them because they have all the precious gems. Like, it looked like a good and hearty time where everybody was just drinking and having fun. But, I mean, even now, they're probably doing better than the humans are. Even if there are certain holds that have fallen, there are still some holds that hold strong.
Machine off while it's getting fixed. Sure, if you fuck up, you have to join the death cult, but even then, there's nothing stopping a dwarf from living his best life and drinking and singing across the world's taverns on his way to find something big and scary enough to kill him.
Although, yeah, like, they're having fun and they're enjoying themselves and they're looking for a good death. Like, ultimately, they're still living a fulfilling life and looking for a fulfilling death. Whereas I don't think humans have that kind of culture at all. Because outside the dwarves, I don't know if there's any like direct comparison to like the Slayer thing and their whole culture and whatnot.
Also live pretty damn long, so you'll have plenty of chances to enjoy life. The dwarfs are also a simple people. Love me mines, love me ale, love me grudgin', simple as. If you're a dwarf, it's easy to be content. If you're a human, you're probably miserable. How about the elves? Well, high elves for starters just use magic to fix everything that goes wrong, so disease is again a non-issue. Even Teclis with his magical bloodline curse just fixes it with some potions. Beyond that, it's similar to the dwarfs, with everything being comfy on Ulthuan and a more traditional sense rather than the dwarven sense of it works so we're happy with it. They are depressed as a race because of how far they've fallen, but being sad because Grandpa was better than you is something I'll take over working at a weapons factory in Nuln where the safety rules are to have fun and try not to fall in the molten metal they use to form the cannons. As for the Dark Elves, well yeah, they don't have the best living conditions for a lot of them, but the Druchii don't give a shit about comfort. One of the buildings in Total Warhammer 2 says as much. They just care about getting slaves and murdering things. Slaves, which of course are usually human, so there's another mark against mankind in these shithole worlds. And the Wood Elves, I have no fucking idea, man. They live in Atholloran, which is absolutely insane, but the forest likes them, so they get to have magical woodland fairy lives instead of being murdered by Ents. Except sometimes the Ents still murder them because they're angry at them for whatever reason. Also, they sometimes hold hunts where they run down Bretonnian citizens for a laugh. It really sucks to be Bretonnian. Of course, the Wood Elves never really complain about it, and I'm pretty sure the average Wood Elf is also batshit insane, so they don't care about these downsides.
Well, from my understanding of the elves, this also seems to be pretty accurate for the most part. Like, they kind of just stay to themselves, and they only come out when they feel like they need to aggressively expand the borders of the forest. There is some in-conflict in a way, because, well, the Ents and the elves are kind of different. But ultimately, I would imagine their living conditions to kind of be pretty okay, as long as, well, they do have to deal with the beastmen, so that is one thing. But, like, who doesn't? Yeah, actually. Now I think about it, I can't really picture what it would be like to live as a wood elf. Like, I know my stereotypical, like, fantasy wood elf and how they would live, but, like, Warhammer wood elf, how would that go?
Use some magic and your mundane problems are gone, and any other problems they don't see as problems. Yeah, of course the Dryad feast on my entrails. That just happens in Atholloran, you know?
Yeah.
I'm still living it up. I made a whole video on why ogre lives are great, so if you want that explanation, here it is. No, I don't have any shame, thank you for asking. From what I gathered, Age of Sigmar is more or less the same for the average person, only with the added benefit of whatever you live in being miserable in its own unique way. Do you live in Akshi? I hope you don't mind 120-degree heat 24/7. I know there's one city in the realm of life that's industrializing so horribly that it chokes the surrounding area with smog 24/7, so there's that one too. Or you could live in the realm of beasts, where you have to contend with the mountain you live on actually being a giant angry turtle. God, these settings suck for the average person. The only race with a worse standard of living than humanity are the Skaven. I was going to try to justify that the Skaven in a way don't have it as bad as humanity, but even I couldn't bring myself to do that. I will say, however, that humans and rats have very different mindsets about living situations.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, even if they're in like a similar or even worse condition, they have a different way of looking at things and a different set of ideals. So, like, they might be happier than the average human, given their current situation, or rather, like, being put in a similar situation. Because, like, with how Ike Claw laughs, that man looks like he's having a lot of fun just making things and blowing shit up.
Specifically, the rats always have the grind set. Every Skaven from the lowliest slave to the Grey Seers think they're the best and they just have to work their way up to being in total control to guide the Skaven to victory. Most of them are wrong, of course, but they still believe this, and they're so ambition-driven that their position in life is almost irrelevant to them beyond what it allows them to have access to and get away with. So no, the Skaven certainly aren't living better than humans, but it also definitely doesn't bother them as much as an equivalent living situation would a human.
Exactly.
Rats stay winning. Now for 40k, and this is the one I wanted to talk about the most because a lot of people seem to think that humanity is living its best life here if they aren't actively in a war zone. It isn't.
What? I mean, even me, as somebody who's just lording about all these settings, isn't 40k literally introduced as like, oh, this is really, really bad, this is grim dark, absolutely nobody's having fun, in the future there is only war? I don't think anybody is enjoying themselves in any kind of living situation, no matter what their position in the society is.
Humanity in 40k is miserable. It's slaving away in service to a corpse on a throne in miserable conditions where it will receive almost nothing in exchange for lifelong servitude. But in 40k, there's loads of different specific worlds to look at for exactly why it sucks to be a human. If you live on a pleasure world, I will grant you that life is probably good. Even as a servant, you're still on a pleasure world. Life isn't that bad when you're
Okay, I did forget about the pleasure worlds. That is a good point, that there's literally just worlds out there that are just like tropical resorts, pretty much. Or at least, I think. They could have some sort of other twist to them that I'm forgetting about, but... And I mean, if you want to imagine it as like, the immediate threats are like galaxy-wide, so like for the individual human, it might not matter as much. But I mean, if the threats do actually reach your planet, then it's likely that your planet will become an inhabitable place. So I don't know. But like it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, maybe. So maybe it's better. then just, you know, like across the mountains is like the orcs that are just ready to come and smack you on the head.
Job is being a butler in the Garden of Eden. Oh no, my weekends are spent relaxing at the beach and drinking martinis all day long.
No.
How do I do it? But pleasure worlds are rare. They are such a small fraction of planets in the Imperium of Man that they're barely worth mentioning. Truth be told, I only brought them up because I need to get the argument against my points out of the way first. If that makes me an asshole, then that's up to you to decide. For the suck, let's go to the civilized worlds. A lot of people say that they're equivalent of, you know, a modern day first world country. And I will admit that in the Caiaphas Cain books, some of the times when Cain is wandering a planet looking for ways to avoid the war zone he's supposed to be a part of, these worlds don't look like the worst places to live. This viewpoint isn't wrong, but it also isn't telling the whole story. They're roughly the equivalent of Earth as it is now, plus or minus a few hundred years of technology. So you could live in the world that's modern day Germany or America, or you could live in the equivalent of a colonial world where one part of the world controls the rest of it. The Imperium doesn't care if that's the case. You may be slaving away on a sugar plantation, but as long as the guard gets its tith, then it isn't going to do shit. Or you could live on the planet of sweatshop factories that has just little levels of pollution to not count as a forge world.
Ultimately, as long as humanity is surviving, then they're probably not going to worry like about the minor details of every single world being managed correctly. Because there's just so many bigger threats that you have to deal with and contend with and always constantly make sure that they never make any advances or gain the upper hand. It's so much that the average human is likely to be forgotten, reduced to a statistic, essentially.
Technically counts as a civilized world, but tell that to the factory workers making ultramarine plushies for the system a few light years over for their entire lives. But even the most wonderful civilized world, you aren't living the ideal 1950s suburban American community without all the society problems ending with the suffix phobia, or ism. You're living in the world of the man in the high castle, or given that it's Warhammer, Wolfenstein land is probably more accurate. Your government dictates how you think, how you work, and how you live in general. Sure, it can be more subtle on these planets, but your life is still completely at the whim of the Imperium. Your religious beliefs are decided for you. If you bring up that perhaps this religion everyone is following has a few flaws, then you're going to be blackbagged before you can finish the sentence. It is a veneer of pleasantry hiding the fact that you are living in the most horrid dictatorship ever. Wonder why Bobby stopped showing up at the country club? Well, you shouldn't, because Bobby never existed, and if you bring him up again, you're going to the same place he did. Just because in a civilized world you aren't actively having the Imperium's boot step on your throat doesn't mean it's a wonderful life. In fact, it's still a shitty life. The Imperium is just doing its best to make sure you don't realize it. Just because you have a decently comfy bed to retire to at night doesn't mean you live a good life. Your human rights are still being viciously violated, and not knowing about that fact doesn't make it better. It's worth remembering that the Imperium is a nightmare. It's not a good place. It is repeatedly stated to be corrupt and incompetent and ruthless and nightmarish and several other negative adjectives. I mean, hell, Games Workshop has said as much directly on multiple occasions. 40K also has the added benefit over fantasy.
Well, I would assume that it was slightly better before the Horus Heresy, but after Horus Heresy, then like it's kind of falling apart. All these systems that don't really make much sense are kind of put in place in order to prevent something that may or may not exist. There's just a lot of things going on in the Imperium of Man, which the Emperor would probably be very flabbergasted to learn about, which, I mean, we can see that quite clearly in the Emperor's Texas Speech series. Things are not going as planned, and the average human is not going to have a chance to change any of that.
See that your government can decide, oh, this planet needs to go, and burn you and your world to kingdom come. Mini rant over. What about agricultural worlds? Gotta be a nice planet-wide farm, right? That sounds relaxing. Well, the Imperium is such a mess of technological levels that, some are probably like that. But then you're just back to being a Bretonian serf with the knowledge that sometimes big metal birds come from the sky to take your food. Otherwise, you live on a planet that's constantly dealing with fertilizer runoff and is being kept just ecologically clean enough to keep all the food production from dying out. These places suck. I have worlds. Good God, they're awful. They're not having you work 22 hours a day, 7 days a week. That level of grimdark is too stupid for me to push as fact. But what is fact is that you live in an apartment most people would consider to be a closet at best. You have no privacy because your walls are shared with 10 other people, half of whom are actually part of your family. The building you live on is also 10,000 years old and hasn't been maintained in 5,000, so have fun with the occasional structural collapse taking a small country's worth of people down with it. Pollution is a given, so have fun breathing an atmosphere of 20% carbon dioxide and God knows what else. Oh, and chances are you live so far beneath the quote-unquote surface of the hive world that not only have you never seen the sun, but you may not have even heard of it. If you're educated exactly enough to know how much to work in the factory that has never heard of something like a guardrail, much less actual hazard.
Yeah, you're basically just another cog in the giant machine that is the Imperium of Man. Whether or not you live or die is completely irrelevant because there's just so many people that you can be very easily replaced. It's horrible to think about, but like that's just the situation that they're in when it comes to 40k.
Hazard equipment and training. Oh, and the farther you go down in the hive, the worse it gets somehow. You've got mutants, chaos cults, gene sealer cults, fanatical cults of the Emperor, which you would think would be on your side until they murder you and your family for breathing in a way that they think is unholy. And waterfalls of factory waste that turn not only the lower levels of the hive, but the areas surrounding it into places that are somehow worse than the rest of it. On a hive world, your life is miserable. Just because you aren't working 24/7 in a factory making guns doesn't mean you're just hanging around chilling out. Just because you get a lunch break in hell doesn't mean you aren't in hell. Also, this is more of a personal belief of mine, so feel free to accept or ignore this part at your leisure, but even though hive worlds are a minority of planets in the Imperium, I genuinely think they make up at least 50% of the people in it. They have trillions of people on them, if not more. Some of the things I've read place that number in the quadrillions. That many people on one planet is going to cause nothing but squalor, unrest, and countless other problems at all times. If I'm right about what percentage of humanity is located on hive worlds, then that means being born a human in 40k means you'll most likely be placed in one of these shit pits. If I'm wrong, then these places are still absolute hellholes to live in. Let's run through the rest of the worlds real quick because I feel like I've made my point. If you live on a fair world, then you're just a caveman, so yeah, that sucks. If you think a death world is great to live on and you would totally survive there, then I have nothing else to say to you that would convince you otherwise, you silly little larper you. Forge worlds are like hive worlds, only so polluted that if you aren't augmented to survive on them or a tech priest who's already 80% machine anyways, you can't even breathe on the things. Fortress worlds are like Cadia, so your life is going to be nothing but constant military service or working to feed the military in horrid factory conditions, only this time you're probably going to be the target of some invading army or other every few weeks. Night worlds have all the fun of feudalism crossed with robots. Sure, it probably looks cool, but I wouldn't want to live there. And while they may be rarely populated, if you're unfortunate enough to live on or even near a demon world, they're called demon worlds. Do you really need me to explain that one? All in all, being human sucks in 40k even more than it does in fantasy. The one thing I can say for humanity is that if you're part of the elite, your life is probably great. Life-extending treatments, luxurious living, power over the masses, the works. But that's such a small percentage of people that I don't...
Well, statistically speaking, if we're talking about a situation where you get bored into said universe, then yeah, as Pancreas said earlier, we're just gonna be born on a hive world. Like, there's just way too many chances to roll that. You'd have to roll like a nat 20 like 10 times over in order to be somebody important in the Imperium of Man.
I don't even think I can say that they're the 1%. They're the 1% of the 1% because most of the top 1% is only considered such because they get a piece of bread that isn't moldy in their weekly rations. Even living as a superhuman in 40k still sucks. Space Marines are constantly fighting horrid wars, and depending on which chapter you are, you may or may not have degenerative DNA inserted into you. Hope you have fun turning into a rage monster who thinks everyone around him is named Horus, and since this just seems to escape the mind of most people, don't forget that intense indoctrination are explicitly part of Space Marine training. I know the word gets used so often in 40k that it loses all meaning, but please remember that indoctrination is a bad thing. Also, the benefits you do get from being a Space Marine are almost irrelevant because there's roughly one Space Marine per planet in the Imperium. Yeah, I know that some chapters have more than just 1,000 Marines, but it's still such a small fraction of people that you aren't going to be one, let alone someone like a Custodes. All of this, of course, is on top of the fact that every time someone blinks, Xenos or Chaos invade another world. And compare this to the other races. The Tau actually have pretty decent standards of living. Not always great, given that there's pretty prevalent propaganda, but it's still better than the Imperium. Mind control is the lesser evil compared to nuking your own planet. The Elder live in a perfect post-scarcity society when they aren't fighting, so that's that. Yeah, their souls are forfeit upon death, but in day-to-day life, they're having a fine go with things. Orcs only care about fighting, and they're always fighting, so they're in heaven, same as in fantasy. Tyranids do not have the capacity to care about these things, so who cares? I don't think the High Fleets have an existential crisis every time they devour a world. Dark Eldar are more or less the same as the Dark Elves. Their souls do drain away, but solving that issue is incredibly easy. Just stab the nearest slave in the throat and your agony quota is fulfilled. Have your soul back. There's peril and despair in Kamara, but there's equal amounts of debauchery and the fun kind of mayhem, so I'm still willing to place humanity below them on the quality of life scale. If you ask the common Necron what it thinks about its living situation, it's just gonna look at you blankly because the average Necron warrior doesn't have the ability to think about that kind of thing. Their nobles might be sad about not having souls or working sexual organs anymore, but they're also immortal and incredibly powerful beings who can come back from death, so it could certainly be worth.
I think in general the Necrons just think that they're much better than everybody else. Although there are many different personalities when it comes to like the more sentient Necrons. But yeah, from what I know of them, I wouldn't consider them to be in a worse condition than the Imperium of Man.
Worse. Hell, depending on their interests, not being organic might be a good thing to them. Raisin, for
Yeah.
example, has until the heat death of the
Raisin's
universe to
having
collect
fun.
things because of it. Overall, yeah, Life is Humanity sucks in 40k. Life is Humanity sucks in the Warhammer settings in general. Don't be a human in these settings if you had a choice. Also, I'm employing the all lore is canon, not everything is true defense, except my interpretation of the setting is definitely the correct one in this case, so you are certainly wrong and
Yeah.
I am right because I have the YouTube channel, so I get to make the rules. I am not 5 years old, I am 6. Thank you, of course, to my channel members for generously
I appreciate how unapologetic Pancreas can be at times.
donating their funds to support me. May your pancreases never falter in their sacred duty. Thank you all for watching.
Amen.
And take care out there.
Bless. Alright, let's see this. What do you got?
Humanity in 40k also doesn't have access to Karl Franz, so quite frankly, they lose by default. No, I'm not going to
Damn.
stop making this joke. It isn't a joke. I want Karl Franz's dick.
Oh, that was a good time to cut the video.